what is your educational background and which bits of it were the most helpful to you?
Well, there's two kinds of education. So I'm sure there's many more, but two affected me. There's formal education, and then there's just being interested in something and then educating yourself in it. So formally, I have almost no education. I started my art education in pottery.
Okay.
And there's no blending from pottery into oil painting. So it may have had an effect, just the idea that within doing something there is a deep knowledge of craftsmanship that is kind of necessary to be able to do anything. You know, you really got to know what, in pottery, if you don't do it correct, it explodes in the kiln.
Uh-huh.
You know, painting is so much more forgiving. But in oil painting, or at least a technique that I developed, there's a lot of chemical understanding. So I guess it gave me an education of just knowing that you got to learn your stuff and take your time. But most of my education was just doing it. You know, painting like shit for years was my education.
So you were willing to make bad art. So
You have to. I think what stops people from making great art is ego and fear. You know, just the fear of failure makes people not make great art. Fear of being exposed. I think a lot of people feel deep in their hearts they're a sham, and if they put themselves out on any kind of limb, they're going to fail. They're going to be ridiculed, or, you know, I think that explains a lot of contemporary art, that it's impenetrably ambiguous, and you don't have to say anything because you just wait around for somebody to tell you what it means, and you just nod your head.
and it sort of turns into virtue signaling, then you can't criticize the art because you're a bad person.
Yeah, you're criticizing its message. But if you really think about great art, the message goes away. It just does. You just look at it. If you look at old paintings, you have no idea what they were trying to say socially. It's locked into this one point in time. It's not a universal. But what is universal about these older statements is that the work itself is impactful. So I find a lot of art today that is just, you know, for lack of a better term, preachy. It becomes meaningless as visual art. You know, it doesn't. It stops being this kind of ambiguous cradle of beauty and becomes a very message-driven, relatively ugly, screaming stance of educating somebody.
Yeah. I mean, Michelangelo, I don't think, had to do an artist statement to explain the meaning of the Sistine Chapel.
Well, I mean, Sistine Chapel had to do with not only religion, but Michelangelo's concept of religion. And inside of it, there are lots of statements. Just with the amount of damnation he put in there is a huge statement. You know, putting himself in the skinless man. I mean, he really did put a lot of political and, you know, religion, which was very political back then, into what he did. But because it reads on so many other levels, it doesn't just come off as, you know, he didn't put big type of, you know, no more war in it or anything, you know. He did it all visually. He let there's a 19th century ideal that we all still cling to, although we shouldn't because it's gone. The idea that work is its own justification, you know, let the work speak for itself. People give that lip service, but that is not what is called for in art today. People don't want the work to speak for itself. As a matter of fact, the work needs so many subordinate treatises and inside of the work, just in case you misunderstand it, God forbid, you have to put text in the work. Text becomes the work. It's the exact opposite of what I'm trying to do. My work is reactionary. I don't think I would do this in any other time. But in this time, I'm trying to create an alternative to that kind of work, that very something much less verbal, much more visceral.
Well, I think you're achieving it, and it's certainly impactful and beautiful to look at.
I still deal with contemporary things. I mean, my last group, I've spent 6 years doing a bunch of paintings that really, they predate, so therefore they can't be a part of, but they're really a part of the Me Too kind of thing. It really deals with the male gaze and things like that. I just wasn't dealing with it as a social issue because I was dealing it with just a human issue, and art itself is something that you look at, but it fits in nicely when I showed all my paintings of women being very confrontational to the viewer. Everybody read it as a male gaze kind of thing, which didn't bother me. It really is about that, but it's about gaze. It's about looking. So I'm making some of the same statements. I'm just not. That's not why I'm doing the work. I think it's why the work resonates and why the work is powerful, because some of these statements are their antiquity. Me Too might be a new thing, but it's been around for as long as human beings have been alive. It's the way people are viewed and the way people are objectified, and especially art, the way you just stand in front of a nude and just, you're allowed to, you're supposed to objectify it. Oh, look, a naked woman. It's not going to do anything because it's a painting, so I can sit there and stare at whatever I want. But my works make you feel uncomfortable if you do that.
Who are your greatest influences, and was there anyone in particular who you feel really helped you succeed at doing what you do with paintings?
No, I had the first one as a human being that one of my teachers, where I remember I was very young and I made a painting that I was really proud of, and I was painting at a much higher level than everybody around me. And I did something and I was really proud of it, and I wasn't very good. And I just had an art teacher who said that it wasn't that good and that I should be damn proud of myself, and she expects more out of me. And nobody had ever expected more out of me the way we teach kids today, is to say that every kid's a genius and every kid's an artist, and whatever they do, you should applaud. But I had a teacher that just said, you're well above this, don't be so satisfied. Yes, someone's actually trying to teach me. So that was a physical. She was instrumental in just me understanding that I can't be self-satisfied. And then, you're influenced by everything that gets in, the negative things. I mean, what I was learning, poor beginning of a sentence, what was going on around me when I was learning how to paint was really, it was like that Gustavian world, that Mark Gustavi kind of factory-looking art. That's what was going on in the realm of near representationalism. Because I'm a representational painter, which in the last 75 years has become really relegated to illustration. Representational painting, although it's starting to see a revival, it's still its beginning. So what I had around me in representationalism was terrible. It was just really, really bad. And the good aspects of it, at least the technically good aspects of it, were not that much better. It was very illustration-based.
Mm-hmm.
It was goofy. I don't know if that describes anything. There's a kind of Mark Ryden pictures of meat and bullshit. It was just goofy. It was stuff that appealed to 14-year-olds, metalheads and stuff like that. It just didn't have the things that I thought were beautiful, because I grew up in the middle of fucking nowhere, and it was, online just didn't really exist when I was a kid. So I didn't know what was really out there. So what I was drawn to was just the pre-Raphaelites. I was drawn to how do I express this? When I was a kid, everything I did was through like a bibliography type learning. I was big with footnotes. I'd read about something, then go into footnotes, into the bibliography, and find out what all the sources were and then read all the sources. And I did it with art too. If I found a painter I liked, I found out their influences and then went back to find out what was going on around the time. So, you know, your basic kid finds out that he likes the academically acceptable visual art of antiquity, which would be, you know, if you're drawn to figure drawing and stuff, you're allowed to like Egon Schiele. Mm-hmm. And then through Egon Schiele, you can accept Klimt, because Egon Schiele basically licked Klimt's asshole, and there's a lot of similar looking devices. But if you keep going, and I did, you can also find all the other peripheral stuff. So I got into the Salon de la Rose Croix, I got into Gustave Moreau, and all these other painters that were dealing with personal mythology. I guess today they're lumped under what would be called symbolist painters. And that was kind of my jam when I was a kid. And I also really liked Whistler because he was a bitch. I was talking about this yesterday with somebody. The idea of the bitch. It's in your time, the bitch does not really work out. You're just kind of not liked. But later, historical, long view of it, the bitch is awesome. But you know, Whistler was really he was bitchy. He was really bitchy, and you know, he only published one book of writing, and it was called The Gentle Art of Making Enemies, and it was really just a bunch of his hate mail. and the hate mail that he got back, and there was something really kind of wonderful about that personality, and it made me think about these things that I think people should think about when they create art, which is, what are you saying, and how much are you preaching weird things like elitism? Uh-huh. Is that okay? Is it okay to preach elitism? Is it okay to look at work around you and say out loud, "This is crap"? You know, it's certainly not the PC.